I've had a challenging relationship with my sister, Sophia. She has always been viewed as the golden child by our family, a status that was solidified from a very young age. After facing significant health issues following my birth, my parents were advised against having more children. Defying the odds, they welcomed Sophia 3 years later, treating her birth as a miraculous event. This miracle baby status profoundly impacted her upbringing, with my parents lavishing her with attention and praise for every achievement, large or small. As the younger sibling, Sophia was always given the best of everything and celebrated extensively, a practice that was evident and acknowledged by everyone, including me. While my parents did provide for me, I often felt like an afterthought. For instance, if Sophia and I had events on the same day, my parents would invariably attend hers, justifying their choice by saying she was younger and needed them more. This favoritism extended to even the smallest of details. There are meticulously organized albums filled with Sophia's childhood photos that my parents treasure. In contrast, they claim that photos from my childhood were lost in a storm, leaving no physical memories of my early years. Whenever Sophia encountered any issue, it was promptly addressed. However, if I faced a problem or voiced a need, my concerns were dismissed or I was labeled spoiled. I was also often compared unfavorably to Sophia, with my parents urging me to be more confident and outgoing like her. Moreover, I was frequently held accountable for Sophia's actions, with the expectation that as the older sibling, I should have been a better role model. This blame game was not only unfair but also deepened my sense of being less favored. Navigating these dynamics has been tough, especially during family gatherings where the disparity in treatment is most apparent. For example, at a recent dinner party hosted by Sophia, I arrived to find that everyone had already eaten. Sophia then insisted that I clean up, relegating me to the role of a waitress, which was both humiliating and reflective of our roles within the family. Sharing these experiences is not easy, but it's important to acknowledge that such family dynamics can have lasting effects on one's self-esteem and interpersonal relationships. I hope by opening up about my story, others in similar situations feel less alone and more empowered to address, or at least reflect on their own family experiences. The situation didn't improve as my sister knew exactly how to use her status as a favorite child to her advantage. She often exploited it to outdo me during minor disagreements or get away with unacceptable behaviors. She regularly took over my belongings and clothes without asking, and if I dared to object, she complained to our parents, who then painted me as selfish and inconsiderate. As a result, I was frequently reprimanded for not sharing, casting me as the villain in every scenario. Contrarily, Sophia was very protective of her possessions. When we shared a room, she strictly kept her side and belongings to herself, and even after we had separate rooms, she maintained rigid boundaries about her things but expected me to be open and giving with mine. This double standard was draining and demoralizing. Sophia's knack for manipulating situations in her favor, supported unwaveringly by our parents, left me feeling isolated and consistently undervalued. No matter what I did, I was always the one in the wrong, while Sophia could never do wrong in their eyes. This ongoing dynamic caused me to spiral into a deep depression. My self-esteem plummeted, and I developed significant self-image issues during my teenage years. The anxiety was suffocating, especially when Sophia instigated arguments or ridiculed me. I lived in constant dread of confrontation, and the aggressive arguments from my parents often pushed me to the edge of panic attacks. Feeling unseen and disregarded by my family, I felt trapped in a relentless cycle of emotional and psychological distress with nowhere to turn for support. My only refuge was my journal, where I wrote down my thoughts every night. It was my sanctuary, a place for honesty and processing the turmoil around me, offering a sliver of peace. I kept it hidden under my bed, terrified that Sophia would find it and use it to taunt me. My worst fears were realized one day when Sophia, who couldn't resist snooping despite my pleas for privacy, discovered my journal while I was away. She read through its private contents, breaching the last safe space I had. When I returned home that evening, I was met by the somber faces of my parents and Sophia in the living room. I feared the worst, perhaps a family tragedy, but the real shock came when my mother presented my journal. My heart sank as I stared in disbelief, and Sophia's smirk only deepened the sting of betrayal. In that moment of grave vulnerability, I was confronted by my mother's stern gaze, something I wasn't accustomed to. She questioned whether the words in my journal genuinely mirrored my deepest feelings. I remember feeling completely exposed. The journal was my sanctuary, the only place I felt safe to express the hurt and frustration simmering within me, away from any judgments. Yet there it was, my innermost thoughts stripped open before those very people who, inadvertently, were the reason behind those writings. Feeling overwhelmed by the intensity of the situation, a panic attack started to build as I struggled to find my voice. Quietly but firmly, I admitted that the journal did reflect my true thoughts, and that they had violated my privacy by reading it. My father expressed his concerns, calling me a psychopath, which bewildered me. My journal was filled with nothing but reflections on how their actions impacted me over the years, yet somehow, they saw these reflections as harbored hatred. The accusation stung deeply. My parents misinterpreted my words and labeled them as dark and sinister. Even my sister Sophia chimed in, embarrassed to associate with me, believing my behavior was abnormal. I attempted to defend myself, explaining that my entries were merely personal reflections, not attacks. They weren't meant for anyone else's eyes, nor were they invitations for judgment. But my family was relentless, fixated on the idea that I was the one with a problem. They announced plans to take me to a psychiatrist the following day, believing I posed a risk to myself or others. Their words, a blend of condescension and misplaced worry, made me feel like the problem, overshadowing the real issues at hand. This sense of betrayal was profound, and their approach only deepened my feelings of isolation and vulnerability. When I began sessions with a psychiatrist, my discomfort was palpable. I was embarrassed, feeling as though I had truly done something wrong. However, the psychiatrist was understanding and used my journal as a bridge to better understand my experiences. She would read entries and ask thoughtful questions, which gradually made me more comfortable. This helped me open up, providing a way to process my feelings constructively. For me, writing down my thoughts has always been easier than expressing them out loud, so my journal became a crucial part of therapy. It allowed my therapist to see a more vivid picture of my struggles. Over time, as I became more comfortable with her, I opened up about how my family had always treated me, sharing experiences of favoritism, blame, emotional neglect, and the deep-seated feelings of isolation and worthlessness that I'd endured for years. For the first time, I felt heard and validated. The journey was slow and often painful, but it gradually became clear that my feelings were valid and that I wasn't the problem, despite what my family had led me to believe. The turning point came when my psychiatrist confronted my parents in a session, revealing the damaging effects of their neglect and favoritism. Initially defensive and unwilling to take responsibility, they claimed their hard work and provision for me should have made me feel grateful rather than accusatory. However, my therapist pressed on, detailing how their actions from my childhood had caused me significant emotional damage, leading to anxiety and depression. By the end of that intense session, my parents were left silent and embarrassed, confronted with the reality of their actions. Yet, the resolution I hoped for didn't materialize. On the way home, my father announced that I could no longer see my psychiatrist, claiming bias. My mother agreed, saying that since I blamed them for everything, continuing therapy was a waste of money. I was devastated. Despite the breakthroughs in therapy, they remained in denial, turning the blame back onto me. Despite feeling powerless as a minor unable to continue therapy without their consent, the sessions had equipped me with tools to manage my emotions and gave me a clearer perspective on my life. I knew then that the only person who could change my situation was myself. I threw myself into my studies, aiming to excel academically to secure a place at a good university, my ticket out of the toxic environment. Alongside my academic goals, I consciously decided to emotionally detach from my family interactions, focusing on preserving my well-being by minimizing my emotional engagement with them. I ceased journaling once I realized that documenting my deepest thoughts might expose me to being exploited. Instead, I focused on my academic pursuits and established firm boundaries with my family, carving out a personal space where I could eventually break away and shape a future unfettered by their constraints and prejudices. When I earned a full scholarship to a distant college, a decision my parents opposed because of its location, I was undeterred by their disapproval. Determined, I took all my essential documents with me as I moved out. Unbeknownst to my parents, that departure marked the beginning of a long period of minimal contact. Throughout my college years, despite their efforts to reach out or visit, I maintained my distance, rarely interacting with them and never returning home during holidays. When they attempted to guilt me into visiting, I quickly withdrew, refusing to be manipulated or blamed. I also severed ties with my sister, treating her as if she no longer existed. With the independence I had fiercely fought for, I focused on my future. After graduating, I secured an excellent job and moved forward without looking back, continuing to keep an emotional distance from my parents. Everything shifted when I was about to marry the love of my life. My parents, having heard about my engagement through relatives, reached out unexpectedly. They apologized for their past actions and expressed regret, acknowledging their mistakes and desiring to forge new memories as I started my own family. Their apology surprised me, stirring a mix of emotions. As I embarked on this new chapter of my life, I chose to release the grudge and invited them to my wedding. Although they asked for my sister to be included, I stood firm on not having her there, and they respected my decision. The wedding was joyous, and seeing my parents genuinely happy for me confirmed that inviting them was the right choice. Since then, I have made efforts to occasionally visit them for dinner, catching up on life. During these visits, I sometimes interact with my sister, who attempts to provoke me with petty remarks about my marriage and in-laws. I address her comments head-on, ensuring she understands her place. Sophia's resentment has only grown, especially after learning I have a better relationship with my in-laws than she does with hers. She often tries to undermine my husband and in-laws with snide remarks, using these jibes as a way to express her bitterness, but I remain resolute in not letting her negativity affect me. Sophia has often used harsh words to express her unhappiness with her own life. My dad has noticed her doing this multiple times and has even asked her to stop, but she persists in making these unkind remarks. About 4 months ago, I was thrilled to learn I was expecting. Since my husband earns significantly more than I do, we both agreed it would be wise for me to pause my career and focus on our forthcoming child. This decision received wholehearted support from my husband and his parents, who have been nothing but supportive and helpful. When Sophia learned I had quit my job to focus on my pregnancy, she became very angry. Her frustration was due to her own circumstances. Her husband had never allowed her to be a stay-at-home mom since they needed both incomes. Unlike me, Sophia had to continue working through her pregnancy, which she found very stressful. Now, whenever we meet, she expresses her displeasure by criticizing my choice to stay at home, calling me foolish and claiming it's demeaning to be a stay-at-home parent. I've often brushed off her comments, reminding her that I can rejoin the workforce anytime, thanks to my extensive experience. However, Sophia has twisted my decision, suggesting my husband is controlling and that I should not have paused my career. It's ironic because stepping back from work was entirely my decision. I realize her negative remarks stem more from her own dissatisfaction than any genuine concern about my choices. That's why I've been keeping my distance from her, to stay calm and enjoy my pregnancy. A week ago, Sophia invited me to a dinner party she was hosting with our entire family and her in-laws. Considering I hadn't been out much, I viewed this as a good opportunity to socialize. I expected that with many people around, Sophia would focus less on me, which encouraged me to accept her invitation. Unfortunately, the evening didn't unfold as anticipated. My husband was delayed by last-minute work obligations, which made us significantly late. He was stressed and kept apologizing for not being able to leave work on time. I reassured him that these things happen, and it wasn't a big deal. When we finally arrived, most guests had finished eating and were chatting away, and even my parents had gone home as my dad prefers not to drive late. Sophia immediately rebuked us for our tardiness. Despite the rocky start, I was glad to have not canceled and felt it was better to show up late than never. Although I did not hold her responsible for feeling exasperated, I felt compelled to offer an apology for my husband, who was clearly mortified by the ordeal. She graciously led him to a chair and served him a meal, which brought some relief. However, shortly after, she ushered me into the kitchen to share some disappointing news. As everyone else had already gone back for seconds and thirds, there was unfortunately no food remaining for me. Despite my growing hunger, exacerbated by my pregnancy, I refrained from making a scene. Recognizing that our delay had contributed to the situation, I proposed ordering something online to eat, ensuring I wouldn't be an imposition. She agreed to place the order, which I appreciated. Yet the situation took a turn when she implied that, due to my late arrival and lack of assistance throughout the evening, it would only be fair for me to help by washing the dishes. I was taken aback and expressed my dismay, feeling it was unfair to equate my tardiness with a duty to perform chores at a gathering I was invited to. Her response was swift and severe. In a stern whisper, she reminded me that as her sister, I should be more supportive, especially considering the effort she had put into hosting. She mentioned that even our mother had helped during the meal. Her expectations seemed excessive. I retorted that if she felt the event was too much for her, perhaps she should not have invited so many guests. Her dismissive attitude stung, and she accused me of being unable to grasp her challenges. Her words grew harsher, criticizing my role at home now that I was pregnant, likening me to a servant for my husband, a remark that deeply hurt. Feeling emotionally battered and not wanting to break down in front of her, I escaped to a spare bedroom to gather my thoughts. Once alone, the panic that I had managed to keep at bay began to engulf me, making it hard to breathe. I hoped fervently that my husband or anyone else would remain unaware of my distress. This solitude was necessary for me to calm my nerves and regain composure. After some time to cool down, I realized how crucial it was to address this conflict with Sophia. Her persistent demeaning comments were unacceptable, and I resolved that it was time to confront her behavior and assert my boundaries. As I prepared to speak with her, I was determined to make it clear that such treatment could not continue. After I moved out of my parents' home, I made sure to bring my journal along. Over the years, I began digitizing the pages and storing them in my email to preserve my entries. This proved useful when I recently stumbled upon photos of these diary entries, which captured many instances where my sister, Sophia, had mistreated me. The night before my husband and I were due to visit Sophia, I decided to share these photos with her husband, Henry. I knew my parents wouldn't adequately address Sophia's behavior, they'd just give her a mild scolding, so I turned to Henry, who had a certain influence over her. Accompanying the photos, I sent Henry a message detailing the years of bullying I endured from Sophia, including a recent incident where she had me clean up after a dinner party, highlighting her ongoing jealousy and resentment towards me. My intent was to give Henry a clearer understanding of his wife's behavior, hoping it might lead to some form of intervention. As expected, this revelation sparked a significant argument between Sophia and Henry, who was shocked to learn about the extent of the bullying. This dispute changed how Henry saw Sophia, casting a new light on their relationship. My mother blamed me for their quarrel, believing I had overstepped by exposing Sophia, while my father remained more neutral. Despite this, my husband fully supported my actions. After learning about the incident, he confronted Sophia to express his dismay and to make it clear that her derogatory remarks about our family were unacceptable. In a follow-up, Henry's anger towards Sophia was compounded by his family's long-standing views of her as selfish and inconsiderate. This wasn't new to them, as Sophia often blamed others in conflicts without acknowledging her own faults. Sharing my journal entries was eye-opening for Henry, who, despite his love for Sophia, was now confronted with a history of tension between Sophia and me that she had never disclosed. This lack of transparency was a revelation for Henry, who had never fully realized the strained dynamics between Sophia and me until now. This has led to a broader reconsideration of their relationship, pushing Henry to confront issues that had been brushed aside for too long. Henry recently contacted me to discuss our familial issues, revealing that he had only known a superficial version of my relationship with my sister, Sophia. Our conversation provided him with a deeper insight, significantly changing his perception of the dynamics within our family. He confessed that this new understanding aligned with certain suspicions his own family had harbored about Sophia. During our detailed phone conversation, I shared my childhood experiences, highlighting how our parents had consistently favored Sophia over me. I recounted the efforts my psychiatrist made to address these familial issues, which my parents ignored until I nearly severed ties with them after moving away for college. Henry also opened up about his interactions with Sophia, noting similarities in how she treated both of us. Previously, he had dismissed her behavior as merely part of her personality. However, learning about the extent of her bullying throughout my life led him to reconsider their relationship. He even expressed concerns about how she might be treating their child when he's not around. In response to these revelations, my sister blamed me for the upheaval and sent several harsh messages, which ceased only when my husband intervened. Meanwhile, my mother has been pressuring me to apologize and minimize the childhood incidents, but I've refused, making it clear that such demands would lead to cutting ties. My father, however, seems to understand my actions. Now the decision lies with Henry. He must consider the best path forward for himself and his family. Regardless of the outcome, I stand by my decision to bring these issues to light, unapologetic for exposing the truth about Sophia's behavior. I remain committed to ensuring she can no longer harm others under the guise of trivial familial squabbles.